Hey there. We got an email from AWS Marketplace the other day that said, our they did they here's what the email said, right? It said that for one of our APIs, that they were not receiving usage requests essentially. So, and then if we had to fix the issue, they have a timeline. They say you need to fix it in a few days. They give you a few days to fix it, and if you don't fix it by then the API is still available for for existing subscribers, but new subscribers are not able to subscribe to the API. So obviously it's a P1 issue. We got of it immediately and we've resolved it. So it's all good. We obviously got of it right away. So we didn't wait for the 3 or 4 days to expire, obviously. But what I thought was, that I could share my experience here and just tell you what happened and how you could be careful about some of these things so it doesn't happen to you, right? Because even though it did not end up causing a downtime for the API, not necessarily, right? Because they only precluded new subscribers from integrating or purchasing those APIs on AWS Marketplace. It is serious enough an issue because we wouldn't be able to bill. They found that for one of those APIs, we were not, reporting usage to AWS Marketplace, and so we wouldn't actually be able to charge our, end user. End user being the subscriber to APIs on AWS Marketplace. So that's the problem, right? That's the gist of it. I'm going to sort of give you, walk you through some of the most, if not all of the things that we actually had to do. So we figure out, right, where do you start? You get an email such as that and you're like, you're sort of panicking, and you figure, okay, let's start looking at the logs, right? That's the first place to start. Now, how you do your logging, there's again a number of ways to do it. So I'm going to show you, again, I'm not able to show production information, obviously, right? At least to the extent I can. I'm going to show the development version of it. So just ignore the URLs that you see because a lot of it might point to our lower environments, but the idea is essentially the same. So we got the email and we're like, you know what, we need to go look at the logs, right? That's the first thing we need to do. So let me actually share my screen, share my entire desktop. Okay, cool. Okay, now that I shared my screen, I'm gonna go here. Okay, the starting point is you actually go to, let me go to AWS. I'm just going to search for AWS console. I'm already logged in here, so I shouldn't have to log in. Okay, so I go here. I just want to make sure my screen share is working, and it is. Yep. Okay. I'm going to go to CloudWatch, but let's say I can either go to CloudWatch and then I can go to log groups and then say I can go to request transformer dev, right? So this is one of our lambdas and we can ignore, and we're not going to go to the log message per se, but here's the starting point. You go to CloudWatch, you go into the log streams and you look at the latest one, or you look at the one for the window of time that somebody's reported a problem for, obviously. But if you're able to reproduce a problem, which you surely want to, then you can, you're going to try and reproduce a problem in your lower environment. So you're going to do it on the dev environment. And just as just to digress for a second, I think I did we've shared this information in other videos before, but for what it's worth, environments in the context of APIs published on, say, AWS or probably other systems as well, like Google Cloud or Azure. I at least there's no notion of environment. They don't provide a notion of environment, so you need to call it dev, staging, test, production, and whatnot. So it is, quote unquote, they are your lower environments, but there's let me step back. There is no organic support for environments provided by these providers in that sense. So what we've done, which is probably what I assume most people do, if not everybody, is you create replicas of those of an environment. So you go from dev to, say, in our case, to test and then staging and production, and then you have all end-to-end dependencies for dev on the dev systems, right? So if you have a dev API gateway, then everything that depends on is also part of the development environment. Now that's something that you have to sort of configure and provision. It's not something that they give you seamlessly out of the box. Now, if you're wondering what they could possibly do, that's something for another day. I have 10 different ideas on uh, how it could possibly be so that life is much easier, but that's not how it is right now. So we have multiple environments, and we have those environments mapped correctly. So if you go to dev or you go to staging, everything that's staging depends on obviously staging. So you need to make sure that wiring is in place, because what you do not want, I mean, sometimes you want to save money, so you might have the same database being shared between test and dev, which is all right. But I'm saying in general, try to keep those environments as isolated as possible, right? Because that's important. So now you go to the log stream, you look at the timestamp, and you figure out what the error is. And in our case, the error was, it said the certificate had expired, right? That's basically what we saw. Okay, now we have, our provider is GoDaddy for SSL certificates. So I don't know, maybe I can log in, but I'm using my phone to record this. So I need the two-factor auth from the device, and I cannot switch out because I'm using the phone as a camera, unfortunately. So, our provider, we purchase our SSL certs from GoDaddy, which is one of the most popular vendors out there. So we, even though it's the same wildcard certificate that we use for a number of our internal and external offerings, the way the certificate has to be provisioned, it literally is driven by the system. I mean, how you do it on Salesforce is different from how you do it on AWS, and so on and so forth, right? That's where it gets tricky. There is no standard way of actually using these certs given by your certificate authority, in our case GoDaddy, and uploaded the exact same way to all these systems, because they're all different from each other, and we're going to talk more about it in this video. So what we do is we go to GoDaddy and you download the certificate, right? We thought we had done it. Clearly, we had missed one of them. So we looked at we picked up the latest cert from GoDaddy, and then we went to AWS. This is what we had done. And again, you have to remember that we are a startup with a number of different products. So there are times we work on, the team works on a set of things, and we do not work on something else for that window of time. So sometimes, we tend to that's why we tried as much as we can to document, not just in text but in videos and audio, voice memos and whatnot, because given the number of things we do, the number of products we have in production, the number of dependencies that each of them have, and the complexity of the architecture of these offerings, the excuses we do tend to forget, and we don't want to rely on a memory, so we do the documentation as much as we can. So we go to the API. Let me go to API gateway here, right? And then if I go to, say, I'm going to pick a dev environment, and then I'm going to go to client certificates. Now, this is a client certificate. So, it says verify request to HTTP integrations come from the gateway. Our initial thought was, okay, this might have expired. But it had not. But even if it had expired, this is not, it turns out that this is not the cert that we had to look at. Because, this is basically saying you're using this cert is to verify, to read what it says verbatim, that requests to HTTP integrations are coming from the gateway, right? So if there are requests originating from the API gateway that you want to entertain in your system, whether that system is deployed on AWS or elsewhere, it doesn't matter. You want to verify the authenticity of that request that's being entertained by your system. Then you would have this cert. You generate a cert, import a cert, and you essentially check the validity of that certificate before you let that request pass through. Otherwise, you're like, the cert is invalid, I'm going to reject the request. That's what this is for. But the error, as in our case, was not coming from here, because the cert was not invalid, but even if it were, it was unrelated. We were like, okay, what other certs are we talking about? And then we were like, it is the Amazon, what is it, ACM? Let's go here. Yep, the Amazon Certificate Manager, right? So let's go here and look at this. So this is a wildcard cert that's imported, and it's, the status is issued. This actually said expired. We're like, what? This is essentially, but it took us a few steps before we got here, but I'm just making it in the interest of expediency. I'm just saying what the ultimate problem turned out to be. And we'll talk more about all the related peripheral areas here. So this cert had expired, and because it expired, we were not able to, because we were making these requests to batch metering. So if you go to AWS batch metering, So the way it works is you have to report usage if you're, if you have your SaaS applications provisioned on AWS, say in our case on the marketplace, and you have to, if you're letting, we support somebody subscribing to it, or either by monthly, annual, or create custom offers, or by request. AWS requires that you report usage. Let me make sure the recording is still good. Yes, it is. So it's up to you to ensure that you're reporting usage to AWS every so often. And as it says here, usage requests aren't accepted 6 hours or more after an event, which means you have the window of time before when you have to actually report usage. If you do not report, if somebody used say your endpoints or our endpoints, and we did not report usage within the 6 hour window to AWS, then that request is on us, basically, right? It would have to be on the house, because past the 6th hour, AWS is going to reject that request. So, you have to implement this however you do it. And we've done it a certain way, and perhaps that's outside the scope of this video. I'll probably do it in a different video. We report usage to AWS every so often. I don't know what our frequency is, but it's obviously much, it's under the 6 hour required limit. That was failing. And since the request originates from within one of our lambdas that we use to actually report usage, it was no good. That also had other impact. It impacted more than one area, but this is where AWS identified it through their testing, through their automated testing, and they reported to us, thankfully so. Otherwise, we would have found out ourselves, but it's just that it so happened the email beat us to us identifying the problem. So because the certificate had expired, the request could not go through, and we had to fix it. So what we did here was we basically, going back, we imported the certificate. Now, but here is also something I want to capture. We had the certificate from GoDaddy, and we were going to import the certificate. So there's three pieces to this, right? There's a certificate body where you enter the PEM content, the private key, which is obviously not part of what you download from GoDaddy, but it's a key that you have privately, that you have to include here, and that needs to match with the certificate. Otherwise, it's not valid, right? So the certificate body is what comes from GoDaddy in our case every time a renewal happens. The private key, not coming from them, something we have internally. It's private to us that we share, we include here. The third one, it says optional. And this is what got us. This is why it took us time to get to the bottom of the problem. We were like, what, the certificate chain is optional. Don't worry about it. And we go import the certificate. And when we imported the certificate import completed just fine, but it kept throwing the same exception. It was not, hang on. After you add the certificate, there's another thing you need to do. Let me go to API Gateway. So once you go there, and then you go to, I'm trying to think where. Oh yeah, to custom domain names, gateway dev. So we have custom domain names defined, CNAMEs. So, obviously if you're the production user, you don't have to go to a CloudFront URL that is difficult to understand. And it's not our URL, right? So we have a facade, which is a custom domain name that we give you, which is gateway.snowpal.com. So when you hit the custom domain name, we have a CNAME set up on our domain server, and it does it redirects to the CloudFront here. So this is the API gateway internal domain name. So when we when we imported the certificate, without updating the last section, which clearly it says here is optional. After we do that, we come back. After you import the certificate, you come back here, you do edit, and then you go click this drop down ACM certificate and pick the certificate that actually is the most relevant one, right? The most recent one, for instance. We use an edge endpoint, as you see here, and there were no complaints. It took that news. We generated the certificate. We had reassociated reassociated the new certificate, or associated the new certificate with the gateway, with this custom domain. And then we were like, what? We are done. That's all we are supposed to do. And yes and no. But it still kept throwing the exception. So we're like, what the heck is going on here? And again, I'm going to cut to the chase, but it took a long time to figure out, because we debugged and we looked at many different places. Sometimes, when you're debugging for a while, we actually end up digressing and end up debugging, spending time on something else that actually is not even related to the problem, but you don't exactly know that it's not related to the problem, how are you to know, of course, right? So uh, eventually we found out that, this certificate chain, actually, before I say that, let me step back. For debugging purposes, we also wanted to create like when we go to the API custom domain, we had a new domain. Now we have an edge domain, and you can look up the differences between an edge domain and a regional domain and what all those nuances are. Again, outside the scope of this video here. But we use an edge domain, and that's what we need, right? And edge domains use AWS CloudFront. So we pick public. When things continue to fail with the certificate, we want to try creating a new custom domain, right? We're just going to try something differently to get closer to the problem. So we go to create a new custom domain, a public domain that's edge optimized, and then we pick the exact same certificate and add the domain. It failed. It said, you know what, your certificate was not issued by a valid certificate authority. That was very misleading because GoDaddy is a valid authority, not just valid independently, but even in the context of AWS, because AWS does support GoDaddy. We know that because there's a page where you can go look up all the certs and the support they have across their different products. As I understand it, uh, if GoDaddy is supported by AWS, it does not unconditionally mean that it's supported by every AWS product. The way AWS works, as I understand it, is there could be some products that support GoDaddy. There could be other products that do not support it, right? So it's still a very legit certification authority, but it may not be supported by that particular AWS product, something you want to keep an eye on. I did not know that. But the error message was still misleading. And again, AWS is a large catalog, massive. So some of these messages, or a lot of these messages, turn out to be pretty generic, very developer messages, if you know what I mean. So you have to do your due diligence to figure out what it could potentially mean, sort of wearing the developer headset or cap. And if you're one yourself, it naturally comes to you. So the error said it's not a valid authority, which is not true for many reasons. Some I mentioned, and more is we've been using them, the same provider and the same AWS gateway for many years now. We were like, okay, what's going on, right? Then we said, okay, let's try different combinations. We try to do a public domain, a domain that can be accessed from the public internet, but did a regional endpoint. Even though we didn't want a regional endpoint, we do need an edge endpoint. We just want to check out the regional endpoint and use the exact same certificate. And guess what? Yep, you guessed it. It actually was able to create the custom domain. So that told us that it's either the certificate is not completely entirely invalid, because then it wouldn't have worked for the regional endpoint as well. So then we get a little bit, try to get deeper, right? It works for one type of endpoint, but not the other endpoint, that the one we are interested in having, but that uses CloudFront. The regional endpoints do not use CloudFront. Again, it took a tiny bit of digging to understand that, but that told us, okay, you know what, CloudFront has its own particular needs. Now, as it turns out, even though this shows up as optional here, that's not exactly optional for all AWS products, certainly not for CloudFront. So that certificate chain needed to be added for CloudFront. And there was a site, I have to pull it up. There's a way you can check analyze your certificate, and there are different depths to your certificate, as I understand it. I'm not a certificate expert by any stretch of the imagination. I just know the bare minimum that we need to provision and get things working. So that there had to be 3 levels, the depth in terms of the chain itself. And our certificate, as it was uploaded to AWS, did not have those 3 depths. It only had 1. And that turned out to be the problem, right? But it's certainly not obvious, and which is why I'm trying to share this in the hope that it's going to help you, it saves you all the time that we had to spend to figuring this out. If you do not already know this, that is. So the certificate chain, where does it come from? Now, let's go back to when we talked about GoDaddy. When you download it, it's a zip file, and you have different options you can pick. If we pick the Apache download, and then you unzip the file, there's 3 files. So there's a PEM file, and I think there is a CRT file. I can't remember. There's 3: PEM, CRT, and something else, the extension. So we have, I believe it's the CRT. I have to look it up. One of those actually has a chain. The other ones are small enough files where you copy that snippet and paste it here, like the .pem file. But I believe it's a CRT, the file that has a lot of these sections, which ends up looking like a chain because it is a chain. As it turns out, you have to copy the contents from that file and paste it here and create the certificate. Again, you're not going to get any reassurance on this page because the certificate will still be created just fine. And you're not going to get a reassurance on the domain association page either, because things that worked earlier and it still works with the new type of cert upload that we just did. So none of them are going to be any different. But one thing was different, which sort of gave it away. After you create a regional endpoint, there's a way to migrate a regional endpoint to an edge endpoint, right? You can say migrate and then it'll try to convert it. It continue in the previous version of the certificate where we did not include the chain, that actually failed with the exact same error message saying it's not from the certificate was not issued by a valid CA. So that was a problem when we did not include the chain and the creation in the import of the certificate. Once we did include the chain, we went back to try to see, hey, can we now convert this regional endpoint to an edge endpoint? You know what? We were able to do it, and that itself was a step in the right direction. We were like, you know what? This is, for many hours we couldn't do it. It did not work. And then finally, we were able to convert, migrate that regional endpoint to an edge optimized endpoint using the exact same cert, and that told us now we've satisfied the needs, appease the needs of AWS CloudFront, because CloudFront does need that certificate chain, and if it did not have it, it was going to continue to fail. So once we uploaded that, then we went back and did the exact same test to see if our usage was reported to AWS, and it sure was, right? So that's how we resolved the problem. So hopefully, this you've learned a thing or two if you didn't already know this. But the important thing is to have a very quick reproducible test case. Let me say one more thing before I end this video, which is to be able to do, we did a curl request, right? We just, after we, when the certificate error continued to happen, we just did a curl or a wget and then go to gateway.snowpal.com. And we would, from our, like the Salesforce, the actual production servers, we would see an error. I forget the actual verbiage there, but it said something along the lines of, I think the certificate, I don't know, there's some legacy. Let me not even try it, right? I forget what the error was. I wish I had it. There was an error. It said that it was not good. But then we called GoDaddy and they verified that the cert was valid. And even when you go to the browser and you check the certificate, by clicking here and you go to the connection secure and you look at the certificate validity, this is, obviously Amazon site, but, for ours, we were using the same certificate, but different forms of it, if you will, for all of our other products. And it was just fine. It was valid. All the browsers recognized it. It had not expired. And when we did it, when we tried to do the wget of the curl from our own machines, we didn't see any error either. But there was an error when the request originated from our API servers, some of which are in the Salesforce domain. I don't yet know why. I know why it failed and why it should have failed, right? Because CloudFront did not like it. So we expect to see the error as to what was misleading. And sometimes this happens. When we enter the browser or when we try to make the curl request from our own machines, we did not see that error. And that kind of threw us in the wrong path, because we were like, hey, the certificate is now valid, the upload's valid, the import's good. So maybe there's something else that's failing. We started debugging other things that we, in hindsight, did not have done, but that's what happened. That's what transpired, because there was a discrepancy there. Now, I don't know why there was. We haven't gotten to the bottom of that and resolve the issue, but we still have the curiosity to know why that happened. If you know it, surely let us know. We'd appreciate that. But that was essentially it. But going back to what I was trying to say earlier, which is being able to come up with a reproducible test case, it's very quick. Now, if you have to do 10 things to reproduce a problem, sometimes I've seen developers do those 10 things 100 times, and it takes a lot of time to do those 10 things repeatedly, and it's a waste of time. So you want to come up with the simplest way to reproduce the problem. By simplest, I mean the quickest way to do it. If things failed after someone went into the 10th page into your web application, a completely random example, if they had to perform 10 clicks for something to fail, and for every time you made a fix or you thought was a fix, if you had to click through 10 times, then you're going to be wasting time. So make sure you're able to reproduce a problem in such a way where it only requires the very last click, right? And just taking a very parallel orthogonal example here of a web application, so you can get to the problem quickly. In our case of the curl request, that was kind of it. Plus, the migration of these endpoints from regional to edge was also along those lines. So we were able to quickly reproduce the problem and then go address it and then verify that it actually worked. So that's basically what I wanted to share in this video. So a quick recap: we were AWS reached out to us reporting an issue, which we would have found out eventually, but thankfully they got to it sooner than we did. There was a certificate expiration issue. We looked at a number of things, and then again, going back to what I said in the last 20 minutes, we were able to go update, import the new certificate from GoDaddy in our case, and to satisfy the needs of CloudFront, also include the chain in the import of the certificate, and then associate that with the DNS, with the custom domain, to get it working essentially, right? That was what we had to do. That's basically it. Thank you.